Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
The Korean War of the 1950s has been called the Forgotten War, for it has been overshadowed by the Second World War of the 1940s and the Vietnam War of the 1960s. What added to the apathy was there was no declaration of war. In addition, there was no national military or economic mobilization as there was in the Second World War. In the 1950s, Americans enjoyed a booming economy and cared little for a war in Asia, especially when so few were touched directly by the conflict. When the troops returned home from Korea, there were no parades to honor them. On June 25, 1950, the North Korean military invaded South Korea. The United States responded by sending troops to save South Korea and to also prevent the spread of communism. The next 3 years saw rapid advances, retreats, and then grinding stalemate. The conflict ended in a stalemate in July of 1953 when a truce was signed. North and South Korea remained independent countries, occupying nearly the same territory they had when the war began. Soldiers and sailors from Rochester served in the war, and a local newspaper kept the public informed about the city's servicemen. Here are the Korean War headlines from the Rochester Courier from 1950 to 1953. This article is worth taking a closer look at, as it describes the brutal conditions the frontline soldiers experienced in the Korean War.
A strongly built man who left Rochester nearly 2 years ago with the knowledge of nothing more violent than a football scrimmage returned home this week a bronzed and battle-wise veteran of some of the bloodiest fighting in the history of modern warfare. During the past 14 months, Albert Pepin of Walnut Street has taken everything the Chinese and North Korean Reds could throw at him. He was a member of the 31st Infantry Regiment, 7th Division, and he was with them when the 7th went to the relief of the 1st Marine Division in its heroic escape from the frozen Chosin Reservoir in the bitter winter of 1951. As a staff sergeant in charge of a mortar team, he took part in the unadulterated hell of Triangle Hill, Sniper Ridge, Jane Russell Hill, and Pinpoint Hill these past few months. The struggle for those barren, shell-churned hilltops saw the advantage change hands 27 times in 3 months, resulted in the death of an estimated 20,000 of the enemy, and established a new record for raw courage and human endurance. Sergeant Pepin was there, and some of his sharpest memories are of the days when his gun crew crouched in bunkers at the entrance to a pathway called Suicide Alley, since to show one's head in daylight was an invitation to death, and of the nights at the same strategic post, the very soil which was blackened by gunpowder, when his crew served their piece hour after hour, lobbing shells into charging ranks of screaming Reds. At the height of the battle for these hills, his crew only got 11 hours of sleep in 5 days and nights, and they snatched a bite of food with one hand while firing the gun with the other. He saw the dead and wounded come back by the truckload, and though always outnumbered, the American troops possessed greater firepower and they held the line, but at what a cost. Sergeant Pepin graduated from Spalding High School in 1946 and operated a lumber truck for his father until he entered the service in 1951. Albert survived the Korean War and returned home to New Hampshire, where he lived the rest of his life.
This ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.